the storyline for the first half of the Josekis is as followed. Imagine that you are in the Joseki Castle. You are approaching the Joseki Castle. That's the name of the castle. It's huge. I'm drawing images from high fantasy, Tolkien, these kinds of spaces. And feel free to add to it in any way that you want. I actually imagine that this book is a huge castle with turrets made out of stones and all of this kind of shape process going on, and make it as enormous and as ridiculous as possible. In fact, the more ridiculous, the more crazy the image. Understand that the more memorable the image to you, the more likely you are to memorize it. And so feel free to mess with them however you like. This is just what worked for myself and my friends, and hopefully it will help you as well. So make it as ludicrous as possible. The enormous castle Joseki. Now, inside the castle is a party, a ball, being thrown at the moment with numbers of characters, people wandering about, and we can add to the castle Joseki as we go over time, make this a palace of loci, which is a method of memorization. But in the meantime, we'll just go to the ballroom. And in the ballroom, in the very center of the floor, dancing, wearing an enormous ball gown, and is the envy of all who see her, is Mom. Remember Mom? Mom is the first character that you'll recognize related to the Joseki, Castle Joseki. And Mom is dancing in the middle of the floor. See her dancing, your mother, in whatever way that you like, or some character that reminds you of Mom. And dancing with her is Hammer. MR is the 3-4 point using the major system. I personally imagine the character Captain Hammer from the Dr. Horrible series, which I recommend. It's hilarious and very memorable for me. Makes it easy. And so, dancing around the ballroom floor, sweeping around, is Captain Hammer. Hammer being the appropriate word. And you can imagine them doing some sort of intense tango movement, perhaps the rows between the teeth, something that helps you recall this connection between Mom and Hammer. And the next connection is between Hammer and the respectable knights. The ballroom is filled with people, and pushing through the crowd comes a couple of very clean, very polished looking knights. Two of them, a short and a very tall knight. These knights walk up to the dancing Hammer and your Mom, bow deeply, and request to dance. They would like to cut in and dance with your Mom. Hammer, being Hammer, as the name kind of sounds, rudely turns them down, kind of sneering in their direction, begins to dance away from them. And now we switch our focus to the knights, and you see the knights standing there, having been rudely pressed away, these polished individuals. And they sigh deeply, having lost their chance to dance with your Mom. And they turn around and walk across the ballroom floor, very crowded, and they're pushing through people, and it's not so hard for them because they're big and strong and wearing shiny armor. And halfway across the floor, struggling through the crowd, they come across a very small creature. I picture him to be about a foot tall. Just imagine that he looks very strange, not human. And he happens to be the squire for these knights, these respectable knights. And the squire is holding their helmet and their swords, and he's struggling, not only to hold these enormous objects, but for him enormous, but also to push through this crowd of people who's not quite making way for such a small creature. And the largest of the respectable knights looks down, decides to help him up, and lifts this small creature up, sets him on the shoulder, and walks out. So far we have associations between the Joseki book, between Mom, between Mom and Hammer, between Hammer and the respectable knights, and now the respectable knights and the odd creature. And this will make sense as we go on. Our attention is now on the odd creature. Once outside the press of the crowd, outside the main ballroom, the big knight sets the odd creature down. He's still carrying the swords and the helmets and such for these wealthy knights. And he's struggling along. Imagine him struggling, very strange sight, something that's very memorable for you. And out of the crowd, alongside, rushes this small boy, in a regular white tunic, just a small person from the local town, rushes out, maybe 13 or 14 years old, sees his chance, and snatches one of the very expensive-looking swords from the struggling small creature, grabs it up, rushes out into the forest. So now the small creature cries out, of course, but is not able to catch this young boy who's dashing away with the sword, running through the forest, dodging trees and ducking under branches, and runs and runs for quite a ways until he feels that he is safe from the respectable knights. And he, eventually runs up to the local caves that he feels like only he knows, being a local. And he rests in the shade of a boulder, panting, looking at his prize, very excited that he got away with this young thief. And he's sitting there breathing hard, and he hears a noise behind him. A soft, purring voice, very deep, very strong sounding, says, "This is our territory, boy. Leave. Now." Startled out of his mind, of course, the boy leaps up, spins around, barely holding this sword that's way too big for him, this young thief. And he sees these two half-cat, half-human creatures. A short, small male, and a huge, powerful-looking female. Very feline, bestial grace, more human than cat at this point. And they're looking at him with their glowing golden eyes, and that's enough for him, and he takes the sword that he can barely hold on to and rushes off, and that's the last we see of him for a while. And these two beastlings look at each other, kind of laugh in their feline way, turn around and continue hunting through their territory. And then night goes on for them, and they have a little success hunting, and you can imagine what that looks like to you. And they smell the human first. A scent of unwashed, athlete and large amounts of alcohol. And they eventually can hear him in the distance as they get closer. They've turned into tigers at this point, so they can move more quickly through the forest. And they hear this snoring. And eventually they get into this glade, which is lit up by firelight, and this enormous man, the largest human they've ever seen, pretty much as large as you can possibly be while still being human, with an enormous nose, huge hands. And this man with a beard is lying there, very unwashed, very drunk and asleep, snoring. And of course he doesn't hear these incredibly stealthy creatures crawl up and take one look at this enormous man and slink away. They decide to go back to their cave where it's safe. And we stay with the big knight, ex-knight really, who's lying on the ground, drunk. And he's been there for a while, and some hours pass, and he tosses and turns a little bit, swiping at flies. And he hears a clinking and a clanking, which wakes him up. The sound of a knife hitting one side of a scabbard, the sound of a sword against a back, and the armor and the helmet rattling around. The sound only a fully armored knight can make as he moves down the road. And so he smiles to himself, thinking that maybe he can get a little extra something, perhaps some wine or some money for wine, because that's pretty much what he does. He drinks. And as quiet as a giant human can, he wanders through the forest toward the sound, and he comes upon the road where he hides behind a tree which doesn't quite cover his bulk. And up the road he sees walking, in a military fashion, the Knight of Fives. And he recognizes the Knight of Fives from his armor and his reputation. On his armor is written a huge red number 5. And the lords and ladies in the area know him as the Knight of Fives because he has sold his services 5 times to 5 different kings and queens in their wars. By his mom, who's known as the Knight of Fives because, unlike his brothers and sisters, he had 5 fingers and 5 toes. And in his own mind, he's known as the Knight of Fives because he has 4 wives and 1 husband scattered across the land. So the Knight of Fives is walking up very, very confident in himself and his skills. And this big man hiding in the forest looks at him, thinks maybe it's better to go back to sleep, and so he lumbers back to the forest and falls down. And we stay with the Knight of Fives. So far we have an association between the Joseki, Mom, Hammer, the respectable knights, the small creature, the thief, the thief, and the two cats, that is the cat people, and the giant knight, the giant knight, and the Knight of Fives. And so now we follow the Knight of Fives as he marches in his military fashion down the road. This is the way he's accustomed to moving, and he moves this way, and pretty much nothing stops him. He's a sellsword, and he's off to find a new owner. And the Knight of Fives marches along, and he doesn't stop through the day, through the night. Next morning, he's still walking, and he comes into a narrow valley, kind of more of a cut between the rocks than anything else. And the path goes through there, and he doesn't worry, he just walks through. And coming up in the other direction along the path is another knight. And he looks like a regular guy, wearing chainmail, a very short sword on his hip, except that he has an obviously magical amulet, a glowing amulet hanging around his neck. This is the Magic Knight. And the Magic Knight sees the Knight of Fives coming up, again knows him by reputation as well, and stands there quietly to see what he'd do. And the Knight of Fives thinks, that amulet might be of some use to me in a future battle. I think I'll take it. And so he approaches him with the obvious intention of bullying him into getting his way, which often works for the Knight of Fives. And the Magic Knight stands there, looks at him calmly, and just before the Knight of Fives strikes, he places his right hand, softly on his amulet, mutters a secret word, and the Magic Knight vanishes. The Knight of Fives glances around, staring, wondering what happened, and then notices the Magic Knight up on top of the hill, above him, looking down. A slight smile on the Magic Knight's mouth, which doesn't happen often. The Knight of Fives is stunned. That's quite some magic. The Magic Knight, accustomed to doing things the simple way, very quietly puts his foot out and presses down on a medium-sized boulder that's nearby. And the boulder gives way, falls down, collecting rocks, down, collecting boulders, and down, burying the Knight of Fives. And very quietly, looking at the avalanche that the Magic Knight has made, the avalanche, I remind you, the Magic Knight walks away. So the association that we have here is between the Joseki book and Mom and Hammer and the respectable knights and the small creature. You don't have to memorize these positions, they will come in the stories. The small creature and the thief and the two cat people. And if you review the story in your head, this will all be there, don't worry. The two cat people and the big knight, the big knight and the Knight of Fives, the Knight of Fives and the Magic Knight, and the Magic Knight and an avalanche. And this will all become clear as we study them. But if you can memorize that storyline and those simple associations, which should not be difficult by now, if I told the story well enough, then you will know the sequence of the Joseki to practice. And that's the basic of it. And again, maybe review this once more, and you should have it. It shouldn't be an effort for you. Just have it on in the background when you clean your room or something, and it should be no difficulty for you whatsoever. Remember to add as much visual imagery as you can. Make it as ridiculous and as huge and as memorable as possible. Make the people beautiful, ugly, scary, sexy, vulgar. Include smells and sounds and storyline, and it will make it that much easier to not only memorize this story, but also to memorize the various Joseki within this book, which you will be able to do very quickly, since I've already done all the work. So, if you have any questions or comments, if you'd like to add your own storyline or anime for the characters, please feel free to do so, and add it to the space below on YouTube or whatever we end up posting this on. Share it with your friends, and thank you so much. Remember to watch the rest of the Joseki videos.